what I meant by men kind of sacrificing their values for the pursuit of sex, as opposed to sex being like a expression that follows of following one's values. This social pressure for the modern man to perform or attain sexually kind of leads them to kind of
So is it that they kind of are willing to sacrifice their real desires just to achieve a certain metric of success in the sexual arena?
I suppose so, kind of like their dignity, perhaps. And it's like getting sex is more important than what they want as a sexual man, I suppose. That's right. I'm just having a hard time articulating that for some reason. Like anytime people want to kind of stand up for their principles in terms of sex, everybody's like, no, you should have got, you should have gotten it, you missed out, so it's kind of anathema even among men for men to take control and be discerning about their sexuality, right?
Interesting.
Right. So they have like a lot of conflict here. You mentioned the evolutionary psychology kind of motivations, but one thing I want to add is that as modern humans, people of this day and age, I think we're more values oriented and volition oriented, more so than the hardwiring of eons past. I think those are the origins, but now we can contextualize it intellectually, and we can even, I think we could do that with our own sexuality as well. So so I think, well, but people don't think that, they think that they're, depraved, lustful men that need to be, that need to atone for their sins, or, and they inflict this on others by, as early as 8 days, with, MGM, for instance, to prevent them from masturbating, that kind of thing. So there's a lot against men's sexuality, and it's an attack on those values too, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, so just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on that. That is interesting, and I would agree with you that I never commit the naturalistic fallacy about our evolutionary psychology. That's a kind of a straw man that gets thrown at evolutionary psychology, that it kind of criticizes us, that we claim that what's natural or innate is good and therefore better. It's we don't think like that. Our unique human evolved trait is our ability to overcome our evolutionary tendencies. So I absolutely agree with you. There's no reason why we couldn't do that in the sexual arena too. So I think what you're advocating for is for men to be a little bit more values oriented in their sexual decisions, rather than completely obeying their primal instinct of their evolutionary psychology, because it is,
or what is expected of
yes, right. So it is a fact that men are certainly less choosy than women, and that's just due to parental investment. Their mating strategy is to play the quantity game to a greater extent than women. But like we agree upon, there's absolutely no reason that that's the only strategy they should go on. But I'm just saying the research does show that is men's kind of preference. They asked men and women how many sexual partners they would desire in a year or something in an ideal world, and just the skewed ratio, the difference between men and women in that question was huge. So but yeah, I think there's no reason why we can't attach more values to the sexual domain than we have been doing. It's interesting that the naturalistic fallacy of saying, natural or from our old world is good, is usually shunned by progressives. They say, oh no, that's bad, we should overcome. But female sexual selection and what that's based upon, they actually think, no, that's natural and that's evolved and that's fine. So it's the only arena that they actually commit they think the naturalistic fallacy is fine. It's a strange juxtaposition.
Right. Yeah. So where I was going with this, with being discerning. So but you know, men can be discerning all they want, but you know, it doesn't guarantee them the sex. And of course, there's pressure to have that sex, and I think that's something that you know needs to be recognized, and it could drive a man insane.
Mhm.
So, for the sake of sanity, can men who want to own up to their sexuality and you know just take control of it, be more discerning, can they express it more consciously with alternatives like sexual entertainment and things like sex dolls, maybe? So you know, because you know, it's like the perfect woman is not going to saunter on as easily as one thinks, and so maybe could incels be helped by things like this? And Elizabeth, feel free to chime in there too.
Yeah, Elizabeth, do you want to say anything on that?
Well, I'd really like to just come back to what you were saying about the impact of culture on our sort of sexuality, actually, Vernon, and also kind of harking back to what you were saying about the way we can be kind of sexually starved, both by, you know, the kind of moralism of puritanical kind of abstinence, and also the sort of overexposure. Because I've actually been reading a feminist book recently, but it's a feminist book I'm really enjoying, non-ironically, and it's called Pagan Meditations on Aphrodite, Artemis, and another goddess, but I'm reading about Aphrodite at the moment, and the writer suggests that you know, Judeo-Christianity made sex sinful, and then the sexual revolution came along and freed us to have much more liberated, you know, open experiences. But what it lacked was a spiritual element. And so she says, you know, the reason that sex now is kind of exciting is because it's subverting an old moral code, and it's not actually feeding our souls in terms of the sort of physical, emotional, spiritual connections that you can make. And so, you know, I think that is what it would be really great to aim for.
Well, that's kind of what I mean when in terms of values, you know,
yeah,
like sexual values. So it's like, instead of just mating for the sake of mating and procreation, we're now talking about sex with individuals. Who is it I'm having sex with? Why is he or she important to the person in question? So I think this is why I think it's important to consider that spiritual aspect, because you know, how do I put it? So in the modern day, when we kind of, you know, left behind the sinful context of the Judeo-Christians, say, the modern spirituality is this kind of connection between us as individuals. It's my viewpoint.
I think you might be interested. I think Ayn Rand herself, and I know you're somewhat of an objectivist. Is that right, Vern? Yeah. I think she says something similar about sex, that it's too important to not attach values to, and that, you know, that it's more important than people think. Right. But yeah, to get back to your question about whether that intentionality could kind of be accessed easier if we kind of accept the paying for sex dichotomy, and kind of how that might feed into it. I think there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't. Jerry Barnett, who wrote a great Quillette piece called The Price of Sex, he discusses that there's always been a transfer of wealth or resources from males to females in exchange for sex. We've always been willing to pay for sex. For example, Melania Trump was once asked if she'd have married Donald Trump if he wasn't rich. And she said, would he have married me if I wasn't beautiful? So there's a concept known as the whorearchy, which kind of crudely describes the hierarchies of women who exchange sex for resources, with wives at the top, followed by mistresses, and followed by all the various categories of sex workers. And in every society on earth, males have brought gifts. Gift giving from males to females has been common, and it's never been the other way around. So the cliche is that men are treated like success objects, but women are treated like sex objects. So, you know, with regard to kind of purchasing sex, I mean, I would encourage any person or any man to honestly contend with their own sexuality and their kinks, and to integrate them into their life in a well-adjusted and healthy kind of way, whatever they happen to be. Now, obviously within reason. And I think as a society, we'd probably do better to move away from kind of using men's fetishes or niche fetishes as a kind of a demeaning insult. For example, like simp or cook, you hear them thrown around, but you'll often find that it's the most high-powered alpha businessman who enjoys the BDSM kink of being humiliated or something like that, and relinquishing power, or enjoys watching other men with his wife. Yet you can be sure you can find some internet kind of neckbeard person kind of trolling this alpha person as a cook, right? So I wrote a piece about polyamory and how we need to kind of contend with that more seriously and have a better conversation around that. And in my piece, I wrote that I could never imagine somebody on the internet calling Will Smith, who to me seems like a paragon of masculinity, right? Totally at ease with himself. I could struggle to imagine somebody calling him a beta cook, right? But that happened, and I just found it absurd. In relation to the kind of purchasing sex, I mean, as long as the transaction is kind of clear and honest, and it's not clear that it's manipulating anyone in any different way than, you know, anything is in a capitalist market. You know, we're all kind of sold something, and as long as it's actually perhaps maybe more honest of a kind of transactional agreement with a sex worker than our kind of more insidious norms about who should pay on dates in just regular dating. So I saw a recent study that shows that a significant portion of women actually have the tactic of going on dates just to get a really nice meal and have no intention of carrying on sexually, and they shouldn't feel obliged to engage sexually with a man after a date or anything like that, but just it seems a little bit insidious, or kind of
we should kind of dispense with the idea that the woman is always right, always good. That she may be in her rights, at least I suppose politically, to kind of do that, but then discern the one who does that and avoid her.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, there is research to show that we consider women more moral and you know, less agentic, so they're automatically kind of morally typecast into the role of victim rather than agent of malevolence. So, you know, but yeah, so that's an example of a kind of insidious norm that's not really acknowledged. No one kind of acknowledges that. We all know it happens, but no one really talks about it. The only area of maybe the sex work that's kind of a gray area for me, and even still it's a difficult one, is the kind of the fetish or the kink of findom, which is financial domination. You know,
that's the one where they take control of your bank account and spend crap, right?
Well,
yeah, that's here's the thing. It's like I really need to interject here, because like one big time concern I have is men kind of, you know, when men's sexuality is expressed in a form of abject self-demeaning and lack of and almost anti-self-esteem, you know, it's like, you know, at some point you got to take care of yourself, and you know, not let I know there's like a market, and you know, there are forces out there that would fill the market for you, but this is just more, you know, advice for people, you know, for men, you know, you got to have more dignity for yourself, and have your sexuality more as like a self-affirming kind of kind of a way, instead of like if there's some kind of weird hang up that places men in a more submissive way, like take care of it effectively soon and never let it become a lifestyle. Otherwise it'll just kind of destroy you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't really have a problem if that is the genuine, authentic kind of sexual expression that would feed their soul, which is entirely possible, to kind of integrate that into their life in a healthy way. That is, to me, being the authentic version of yourself, and that is not always a negative thing, but the line gets very blurry for me when it's introduced, and it gets excessive around that kink of the findom, the financial domination, because the kink seems to manifest as literally just giving money, that's the kink. For example, they even do things like ATM meets, where they meet the sex worker at an ATM, take out money and give them to them. And I'm not trying to kink shame anyone, but it just seems less obvious where the line is between who's being manipulated or taken advantage of, or how much of it is, well, I'm happy to pay for that because it makes me really horny. It's not that clear in that kink for me.
Well, I want to get back to transactions a little bit after, but I kind of want to bring up the idea of simping again. So because you mentioned that one. So now the thing about simping is that I think it is not just about having a sex transaction. I think it's more close to what we just talked about here. It's like kind of men kind of becoming altruists for women. It's sort of like it is my rule to give and give and give, and and kind of support the woman almost no matter what, kind of this very chivalric sort of act of self-deprecation almost. It's like, it's what I was talking about, discernment. It's like it's undiscerning, and it has, I don't think it has much to do properly with taking control of one's sexuality. And if that manifests itself as taking control of one's sexuality, then I don't know, I think you have other issues. But so I think there is a difference between being a discerning sex client and kind of being this simp. There's also this kind of feeling I get about simps, in which that they think women are these powerless creatures that would not get anywhere in life without their sex work, so they must provide. They must keep on providing. Let me be your ATM almost.
Yeah, I think there's also something at play that the more kind of no big deal you make sexual taboos, if you kind of have the attitude of, oh, there's no big deal, and people kind of make it as a part of their sexual identity, where they almost introduce themselves alongside their kinks, it means that kind of necessary taboo or darkness or around sexual fantasy, the line where that exists keeps getting pushed further and further and further. So for something to be taboo in the past, it might have been just going to a sex club or a dungeon or whatever, whereas now it gets more and more extreme to exist in that world, because we've kind of sanitized, but in our effort to make kind of sexual discrimination and normalizing sexual kinks and taboos, we've kind of stripped it from that frisson and kind of danger element, and it means that expresses itself in more darker ways, perhaps.
So back to like transactions for sex. So we talk about legalizing sex work, and I think we're all basically for that, or at the very least decriminalizing it. So, but one point I have is that we rarely hear legalize the sex client, because it's just as criminal to purchase sex as it is to sell it. Am I right, or am I getting this wrong?
So I wouldn't be an expert on the legalities of it all, but I do think that there's a problem when this is discussed it's often discussed for people rather than alongside people. So, for example, I think what you're describing is something like the Nordic model, which I believe a lot of sex workers themselves will rail against. Now, I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert on it, but incidentally, Jerry Barnett is, to mention him again, he's having a conversation with an OnlyFans star called Ariel Anderson, who's written some great stuff around sex work, pornography, and OnlyFans. I mean, my libertarian kind of sensibilities around this area and areas like drugs as well, is that legalization all around will make anything a little bit safer and more can regulate it more, and kind of to drive it underground by making it illegal is more dangerous, in my opinion. I think that's the attitude of a lot of sex workers, but again, I can't claim to be the expert.
Right. So you brought up OnlyFans. So why is that the thing that's popular? Even though, you know, I'm not even talking about just free stuff out there. There's other paid ways to, you know, make sex transactions. Like some sites, you know, there's sites like MedArt, for instance, that have a, you know, a subscription fee, but you get this slew of, you know, models and stuff. So there's all kinds of sites like that. Why is OnlyFans getting so much attention right now?
I think it's kind of, you know, I mean, like you said, there's any amount of free pornography available on the internet. I think this shows that it's a different itch being scratched for people who want to have a relationship with OnlyFans or become subscribers. I feel that they're craving the intimacy, the connection, and the recognition, kind of the interpersonal dynamic, where they feel they're actually getting insight into someone's real life. It's kind of real or perceived intimacy that they get, and obviously the line is different for whether that's true for a lot of performers or not. Many incels that I know kind of rail against OnlyFans as being exploitative, but I don't inherently see why it should be considered exploitative. I would take the argument that something is better than nothing. And it could still be fun anyway. You know, I mean, there's no reason why someone could actually subscribe to OnlyFans even if they are having sex in their own right. It could be a kind of a way to explore kinks and fetishes that they don't feel comfortable exploring with their peers. For example, they don't want to risk introducing an unusual niche fetish to this girl that they've just met, but they might feel more comfortable and confident exploring that with a sex worker or OnlyFans. My final thought on it would be that OnlyFans is ultimately a kind of a simulacrum of intimacy. It's ultimately a little bit more hollow, but again, something is better than nothing. But I kind of, in my presentation for the International Conference on Men's Issues, I talk about this as being like the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. Are you aware of that movie?
I'm aware of the movie.
Yeah, so for your audience, it basically follows Joaquin Phoenix's character, who develops this kind of intimate relationship with what is essentially a kind of an AI operating system that's in his ear all the time. And there becomes a crashing kind of dawning realization moment in the movie where he realizes just how hollow this faux intimacy really was. And that's kind of what I would suggest OnlyFans is like. I mean, a lot of OnlyFans stars will say that they have real intimacy with their subscribers, and you know, who am I to question that? But it seems like a simulacrum rather than a real connection.
Yeah. I mean,
interestingly, final point on that. Porn and OnlyFans, that actually might serve as kind of like a pacifying effect on what would otherwise be a very destabilizing portion of society. So perhaps, you know, for example, incels historically have been a very destabilizing force on society, but not so much now because perhaps they're being pacified through the online stuff. And it might be worth talking, I don't know if how much you want to talk about the future of kind of the sex robots or the virtual reality and what that might lead to down the pipeline.
Right. Yeah. I'd love to have that kind of a conversation. But before we get into that, and Elizabeth, I know I've been kind of having you silent for a bit. I'll get back to you in just a moment. So it is my understanding about there's all kinds of OnlyFans people. Some who have it free, but all the content is paid per, and some you have no idea what you're kind of getting until you subscribe, and even then there's still more paywall stuff. So I'm actually really concerned whether this platform in particular can almost encourage exploitative behavior on the part of the content creators. Now, I understand that it is on men to be more discerning, right? But I don't know if anybody's really having that discussion in a nuanced way. It's either just it's either no fap or be a simp. So I think it's okay to have choices. It's okay to have preferences. And I wonder if some people are kind of saying no to a woman might be a sort of chauvinistic behavior. So I'm pressured into like being more supportive, even though I'm not really into this kind of stuff or something like that. That might be kind of an out there kind of a theory, but I don't know. I think there's something to it.
I tend to think it's the market of OnlyFans has been democratized a lot, so it's essentially a buyer's market in many ways, whereas there's any variety and any amount of difference available. So you can really maybe zero in on what is your particular kind of niche that you are happy to pay for. So I think it is perhaps potentially a more honest transaction than, but I get what you mean, the pressure that you might be obliged to, but that could apply, you might be obliged to pretend that you're into the sex that you're getting from a woman you've just met in the dating arena, because it would be not considered okay to say, well, it's not really for me. Whereas when it's a clear transaction with an OnlyFans content creator, then you maybe may feel, oh, well, I should get exactly what I'm paying for.
Right, yeah, because that's the thing about OnlyFans is most of the time, aside from maybe a preview here and there, you don't really know what you're going to get, So that I think that's I do think that criticism of OnlyFans is pretty valid. I think it's like right.
I mean, you can take your money elsewhere. It's just it is a market.
Of course, yeah. You have any further thoughts on that one, Elizabeth? Or?
Yeah, I mean, and I was thinking about the findom thing as well, and I can see that it may well, and a lot of our kinks and just the way we approach sex generally, I think for a lot of people at various points in their life is based to a significant degree on damage, in various ways. And even in, situations where that's the case, and that's why we're pursuing a certain kind of sexual experience, I think that's kind of okay. That might be the beginning of the road to healing, So I think just the only sort of concern I have is that it's the same, it's the same concern that I have with porn, with prostitution, with findom, with food, with drugs. It's that people will zero in on any number of things that create dopamine and use it to manage their negative emotions.
Right.
And I think it's okay to do that to a degree, but that we need to be learning healthier ways generally, or more balanced ways, more balanced approaches. And it's social media as well. It's like perhaps there are men who are doing the ATM thing, which is incredibly bizarre. And
nice.
Perhaps there are men going on OnlyFans, but what are women doing? They're posting selfies on Facebook 18 times a day, just fishing for those likes that give them a little hit of dopamine every time they get one. And I think, yeah, just honest conversations could help a lot of us, honest and nuanced conversations about how we deal with our damage, how we deal with our negative emotions. And
that's an interesting one, Elizabeth. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying a lack of judgment.
Yes, I very much agree with that, and that kind of touches on what I want to say is that there's often a kind of judgment attached to where someone's sexual persona comes from. For example, a lot of women have rape fantasies, right? And you know, who's to say whether in amongst all those women who have those fantasies, and it's a popular one, whether they are all damaged women or not. And also, if someone's sexual kink comes from a dark place, for example, who's to say what should they do with that? Is the correct route to suppress that, or is the correct route to express that in a healthily integrated way? You know, it's not clear that someone shouldn't be allowed the freedom of sexual liberation and expression just because they've had a really dark negative experience in the past. I mean, I'm not going to get Freudian on the deep dive analysis into where people's kinks and stuff comes from. I'm less concerned with that and more concerned with whether they're able to integrate them into their life in a way that feeds their soul and that kind of doesn't seep out into other relationships and destroy them. So yeah, I think we're in agreement on that one.
Yeah, I can't remember where I read about it, but I did hear an anecdote about I think it was a New York Jew whose particular kink was to have a sex worker dressing up as a concentration camp guard. And you know, and it's like, I feel like a lot of people would respond to that by going, well, he needs therapy. And it's like, well, isn't that quite a sort of feminized response? Like, just talk about it. Whereas, you know, don't a lot of men prefer action to talking about it? You know, what's wrong with that?
I don't know if you've seen, Elizabeth, what's going around on Twitter now is a very much a why don't men go to therapy instead of such a thing. So a lot of people have been tweeting, why do men go to the gym instead of therapy? Why do men talk to their friends instead of therapy? And I retweeted a very funny kind of joke about that today, where it says, why do men read instead of go to therapy? Why do men have hobbies instead of going to therapy? Why do men listen to music? Why do men eat? Why do men have sex? Speak. God, why don't they just contact a professional brain manager at the first sign of distress like a good little boy? And I think that just totally nails this therapeutic culture and feminized kind of expectation of men to process their emotions like women. And there's a very funny podcast I listened to recently. Oh, I can't think of the counselor's name, but he said he gets a lot of clients where the women complain about men a lot, and they complain, oh, men are doing so many bad things, but that he never gets a client who says they want their husband to be more like a woman. So it's like, on one hand, we're encouraged to be more feminized, but then women don't really want that. So the real reward system that men care about is female sexual selection. So we will behave like what that rewards, rather than what any Gillette ad tells us to do.
Right. Yeah, because, you know, like I defined before, you know, masculinity is about the aim and the action. So I think that I think it's rather natural that the expression is as thus. It is their therapy. Like, you know, why don't they seek therapy? Well, it is their therapy. Yeah. Right. Though I will say that, you know, let it be that healing process instead of something that just festers, you know. So that's what, and I think that's kind of what I also mean by discernment. Now, now, what Elizabeth talked about, the person with the concentration camp sex worker fetish. So that kind of speaks more to men's need, and probably, and I'm not saying it's only men, but men's need for psychodrama. It's like as kind of like a way to pursue values where they may not have access to the real article. Does that make sense? Right. Yeah. So that's why I tend to, even being an objectivist myself, I defend things like finding a fulfillment of that psychodrama using things like porn or sex dolls. And I think sexual expression could be, and fulfillment and healing, if you will, could be more and more advanced with the proliferation of this sexual marketplace of creative things. I think more interesting ideas and, excuse me, Elizabeth, alternatives to real women might, it might serve some good.
I don't think it always has to be an alternative, though. I think it can be an addition.
Exactly. Right. That's the point.
You mentioned polyamory earlier, William, and a lot of people are on some kind of spectrum where they've got some kind of interest in that, and it might be that they are not willing and able to go 10 out of 10 on the scale and have both them and their partners having sex with other people, but they might be able to watch porn, or they might be able to get a doll involved and stuff like that. And so it's all ways of playing and having fun and being able to realize the desires that they have in safe ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And in response to my polyamory article, I encountered something which is called monogamy fragility. Some critics kind of took the line that if you allow any portion of society to practice polyamory, that it's kind of an expectation that one day everyone will have to do this. And I really, I don't think so, and if that's the case, it's not such a threat to let people express that. And like you said, Elizabeth, everybody's line is very different for what they consider the boundary lines of monogamy. So for some, it could be, no, you wouldn't be allowed to watch porn. No, you wouldn't be allowed to flirt with the waitress. And for some, it's, I don't mind watching you having sex with another woman, right? So it's, everyone's line is very different. So you can't really decide that for other people. And I'm a big believer in my polyamory piece. I mentioned that we should have a focus on fidelity over monogamy. And what I mean by that is that you're kind of honest about the relationship with your partner rather than just subscribing to someone else's kind of structure of monogamy, that would be more important. In response to my polyamory article, I had people who couldn't believe that a polyamorist could cheat on their partner. They said, well, no, there's no cheating. And I'm saying, well, there absolutely would be, because you're committed to your partner in the same way. There's any amount of variety in there. But yeah, that's interesting.
Doesn't it? It depends on the rules, and everyone needs to be aware and comfortable with the rules you've set out for that specific relationship. And it might, I've spoken to a polyamorous friend, and the line in his relationship is that there needs to be no emotional connections. So it would be cheating if, an emotional sort of relationship developed.
Yeah.
The physical side is, fine and allowed.
So it's kind of like compartmentalizing that sexual need for novelty and variety, or extra. Yeah, interesting. People have, different folks, different strokes, as I say.